will be.
Okay. Well, Mickey's not coming. He's got a knee surgery.
Oh. Okay.
It's all right. So I'll call the meeting to order then. All right. I'll call the meeting to order. 4 members are present. 1 member is excused, and we have approval of minutes. Have a motion for
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. And then Ms. Grill, yeah, you had the communications. We want to go on with number 1 on our agenda.
Sure, that is,
Oh, yeah, communication from
yes.
Civil Service Commission regarding the abolishment of civil service system and commission. We just want to place that on file.
Move the place on file.
Yeah, thank you. A motion from Alderman May. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Alderman Rote. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. And then item 2 is the communication from the city administrator transmitting the 2018 capital improvement program for consideration and inclusion in the 2018 City of West Allis budget.
Mr. Chair, if we could take, item E1 up first and then number 3 and then number 2.
Sure, yeah, thanks. Let's perfect. Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca,
Okay.
with item E1.
So, just recapping, last week there was a discussion before the committee regarding a possible waiver of insurance requirements for the intellectual property insurance for our branding and marketing consultant, Savage Solutions. One of the directions given by the committee was for me to reach out to CIVMIC to see if we could acquire such insurance for ourselves. I spoke with Tom Mann, who is an employee of CIVMIC. He's been there for 30 years. He advised me that they didn't have insurance for this, and he's not aware of anyone having a lawsuit regarding this as far as the CIVMIC members in the 30 years that he's been there. Additionally, if we were to get this type of insurance, it would not cover for injunctive relief, which means if someone would sue us and we would have to get new logos and replace logos and things like that, we wouldn't be covered with our insurance. Thirdly, I ask when they changed their logo and branding, did they have this type of insurance? Did CIVMIC get this type of insurance or require their consultant to get that type of insurance? And they did not. So that was somewhat telling to me. So we had the mayor and I had also talked with Corey Savage, who is the owner of Savage Solutions. He said typically when we go through the branding process, when they will come to the council with a suggestion for a logo or tagline or something like that, they would have done a search to ensure that we're not matching or using someone's that's very close to the one they're suggesting. And then should the council adopt that, then we would get a trademark. We would apply for a trademark of that logo. So guess I'm here again asking for a waiver of this intellectual property insurance requirement for the contract with the Savage Solutions.
Mr. Chair,
Alderman Michael.
as the member of the Tourism Commission, as a city administrator, and I spoke to one other member of the commission, Rod Rashka from Hampton Inn Suites. They weren't the low bid, okay, so it wasn't, they weren't selected out of our short list of 3 based on them underbidding somebody maybe artificially, if the thought is that they didn't include the potential cost of the insurance. We really chose them based on the quality of their product and where they saw as being a good fit for what we wanted, what the Tourism Commission wanted for a product and the services from in this contract. When I spoke to Rebecca this afternoon, also, I was shocked when the insurance, our CIVMIC, and they're not just our insurer, they cover
48 other municipalities.
dozens of municipalities. they don't see a need for this. Not that they're gonna cover us, you know, I understand Scott's not here, you know, but, I'm just trying to think what he would say. It's like, well, they're not gonna cover us, but, and the question, as it came to me too, it's like, they're gonna present us with ideas. It doesn't take a lot now to put something into Google. You can do a Google image search on a logo and obviously a Google search on a slogan or whatever, a phrase or whatever, and find out what it is. I guess maybe that at that point, if we find some similar matches, then we'd ask the city attorney if he thinks it's too close. I mean, I'd still like to keep them, if we decide to waive the requirement. And again, apparently the insurance wouldn't be buying us much of anything. You know, it certainly wouldn't pay for us to rebrand, right? So, I guess I'd be in favor of, you know, waiving the requirement since it seems like it's superfluous, you know, or certainly not an industry standard, so.
Mr. Chair,
Alderman May.
I agree. I haven't talked to Rebecca this afternoon. Hearing the exact same things, it's fine. And we're going to see it before it gets approved anyway, so we've got another kick at the can, if you
Yeah,
will.
yeah.
So it's not like we're just going after this and taking it. We're probably not going to get the Big Apple or
What?
the Big Macintosh.
No, that's taken.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm fine with it.
And Mr. Chair, I mean, I feel good too, knowing that Civic didn't even do it, so.
Yeah, and my feeling is I'm very comfortable with waiving the insurance requirement as well. I mentioned before, I think the city attorney does a good job of advising us what risks we're taking, and this is just another one of those risks that we understand that we need to take in order to undertake the business of our city. And it's a relatively minor risk. You know, we're also looking at the size of the risk too, so. All right, I think we have a consensus then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. And that's good enough for you then, right, Rebecca?
Yes, thank you.
Very good, thanks. And then, any other items before we go into the budget, or can take a quick recess, or?
I hear a door.
I hear it. Hey, look at that!
That's perfect timing. That was perfect.
Yeah, you are right on
That's
time,
incredible.
Mr. Mayor.
Not a second late.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mayor Devine, the floor is yours. Thank you.
I'm gonna have to leave a little early as well because I'm between basketball practice and puppy class. So
You're learning to be a puppy?
I am learning 10-week course. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I was kind of chuckling on my way here because I feel like every year I'm making the same remarks to you that still a challenge. We're still struggling to continue to provide the services that our businesses and residents have come to expect. We're still looking for creative ways to do things differently and improve our processes. I think the big change tonight is the fact that we folded a lot of the strategic goals into the budget process and tried to take those goals and use those in implementing a lot of the highlights and basically what we're including in this budget. Briefly looking at our vision statement, again, the community that is focused on providing its citizens and businesses a responsive level of services, and we want to make this city the place to be. We want to make this a great city. We want to make this a desirable city. We want this to be a city where people want to live. We want this to be a city where people want to send their children to the schools. They want to go to the playgrounds, bike trails, parks, restaurants, feel safe, like living here, like doing business here, and succeed in business here. So with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to, who's next?
Me.
Rebecca, and then Peggy, to kind of go into the meat and potatoes of this. I won't be able to stick around if there are any questions afterwards, but you guys all know where to find me. So feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email with any afterthoughts or ideas or suggestions, that kind of thing. So thank you. I can stick around for a couple minutes.
So, after the inclusion of the vision statement in the presentation, we have the strategic goals. You're all familiar with them. There are 5 there, and then, so image, brand, destination, you just waived the contract requirements so we can get started on the image and branding, and then quality of life, citizen engagement, economic vitality and sustainability, and excellence in government. In a few slides, that will be upcoming, you will see the different initiatives that are included in the budget that go to each of those strategic goals. So through the process this year, we tried to do 3 things. One was to review our current processes, and if this sounds familiar, like the mayor said before, it's pretty much what we've been trying to do each year. We used different words this year, so review is the first one. So reviewing our current processes and structure to make sure we're doing things the most efficiently with our service delivery, realign services to different priorities. As times change, priorities change, so we need to do realignment at that time, and then reallocation of of resources. So some of the things you'll see is maybe a movement of some personnel from one department to another. So the next slide we have is what's included in the 2018 recommended budget. Service delivery remains a high priority. New initiatives to reallocate and maximize the resources. Review of staffing to redistribute and align with the priorities. The compliance with the state limitations and the maximization of shared revenues. Expansion of our capital improvement program. We'll discuss that after we finish the budget presentation. And if you noticed, this year your recommended budget was maybe twice as thick as last year's. We did include business plans from each department. Some of them were quite extensive. Next year I'll probably have a limitation of 5 pages, just so people are more concise. You liked it.
I like to know what's going on. It's good.
I think people can be concise and cover things, so. So that's the first step in the performance measurement, and we also had performance measures, departments included those, and you'll see us discussing those as the months go forward, coming back and letting you know the progress on those performance measures, because I think it's important, just like with a strategic plan, we need to incorporate that in what we're doing on a daily basis. The budget is a guideline for the departments for next year, so we need to keep that in mind as we go forward. So I'm not going to read all of the highlights because you can read them yourselves, but the items that are on this page were called from the individual business plans. So I'm sure if you have the opportunity to read those already, you might have seen some of this. So, and strategic goal number 1, the image brand destination, it's working with a marketing firm, promoting the farmers market, creating a farmers market marketing plan, streets and streetscaping. I'm sure we'll have some discussion on that in the capital improvement program. Burnham Point revitalization and other items like that under the image. And quality of life, and number 2, alley conversion, that's an item in the capital improvement program. Technology security, that's also an item in the capital improvement program. Emergency critical incident training, fire department reaccreditation, working to get more of our building inspection permits online. That would also go with our excellence in government, adopt a catch basin program, things like that. For citizen engagement, we're working on the virtual city hall, where we're trying to get not only, maybe it's a misnaming of virtual city hall, but having more of the services that the whole city provides online, so citizens don't necessarily have to come during the office hours to do their business with the city. Expanding absentee voting options as allowed by law, start working on our census working on expansion of our credit card payments. That pretty much goes hand in hand with the virtual city hall to allow people to pay online. Now that we are starting to work with our marketing firm, we can work on our website redesign to have a more citizen-centric focus. If you notice, most of it is department focused, so you kind of have to know which department the service is under to find the information, which makes it difficult. We need to think of it as an outsider, not as an insider. So we'll be working on that. Going on to the next page, strategic goal number 4, we'll continue working on the capital improvement program, working on the financial policies, and let's see, there's also the development, 6 Points, Town Center, Teledyne, working on reducing our OPEB liability. That's been a discussion that we've had several times before this committee. We continue to remain qualified for the expenditure restraint program. As I indicated earlier, redistributing staff positions to align with priorities. And then last is strategic goal number 5, excellence in government. So continuing the training and development of our staff through lean training, supervisory and management training, executing an executive leadership team development, a 1% pay increase for all non-represented employees, and then the continued creation and implementation of the pay for performance system, reallocation of the positions, streamline hiring processes, improve IT project backlog, and then some other things like in our inventory department, implementation of a barcode inventory system, which will be a significant improvement of the service delivery there. Is there any questions about any of these items at this time? No? The next 2 slides are just basically a snapshot of I'm going to say current, it's probably 2015 data. It's from the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance. They always put things together for us on a yearly basis. These are what we have received for 2017, but it's based on 2015 numbers. So you'll see the age of this median age of the residents is 37.9. Median housing value of 141,000. You're fully aware of the population. The household income is about 45,000. We have 46.8 renter occupied, and then the poverty rate is at 14.3. The next slide, this is per capita numbers. So the amount spent per capita for general government was $108, street maintenance $97, fire and ambulance $207, and police $340. So total operating spending is $1,103. If you want, I do have data that shows other municipalities. If you would want to, I could share that with you at any time to see how we're compared with them, with those numbers.
Yeah, and you've got it in the budget
It's
too.
in the budget,
Yes.
yeah.
And now I will pass it over to Peggy for the bigger numbers.
So on this slide, we just wanted to give you a little bit of a backdrop on what we're basing, some of our decisions and where we've been coming from in the budget. You'll see the equalized value. We don't have an assessed value. So the Department of Revenue by the end of October will have that information to us. That's really what's going to drive our tax rate. Can guess that there might be some questions on what kind of ballparks we're looking at for tax rates, and I can certainly give you that based on last year's assessed value. But what happens is if you see in the equalized value, which is the first set of numbers, back in 2012 is the highest in this range, and we went down. We almost hit it back in 2016, kind of a measure of the economy. Cities are usually, property values are usually about 2 to 3 years behind the economy. So we built back up in 2012, and now we're looking forward. So the question just becomes, with our equalized value going down 2 years in a row now, what will happen with assessed? Last year, assessed value, even though equalized decreased, assessed value increased. I'm not sure we can get that lucky 2 years in a row as far as the economic factors. So my guess is it'll likely go down a little bit. How much, we'll have to wait until the end of October to figure that out.
And Peggy, you had said that how we're waiting on the Department of Revenue. What are we waiting for from the Department of Revenue? Is it just the manufacturing that they assess, or
So
what is it?
they review all of our numbers as far as the locally assessed numbers, and then they add in the manufacturing, and then they give, the key is this economic assessment ratio. So basically, that's what they start with, the equalized values. They give us those back in August. On August 15th, they release those, and that basically puts everybody in the state on the same page. And then they go through, and this assessment ratio adjusts the economic value depending on where you are in the state and what kind of conditions you have as far as your demographics, etc. So yes, the manufacturing numbers will be put in, but more important than that probably will be this economic assessment ratio that we need to come up with a tax rate.
Thank you.
General fund revenues and expenditures, I get it, that doesn't tell you a whole lot because we budget, these are budget to budget, everything on the state's basis as well as for expenditure restraint, levy limits, and then even how we set our tax rate is always based on budget, not actual. So I can certainly give you some budget to actual numbers. I think sometimes when we get into analysis and how can we get better with budgeting and different things like that, it's important to look at those actuals. But based on this information that all plays together, I showed you the increases in budget revenues and expenditures year over year. So again, something we can build on in the future. We can talk about comparisons. We can talk about where we want to be. In general, right now our levy is up, and we'll get into the details later. It's up about 800,000. That doesn't mean we're proposing to, as some would say, tax to the max. What we're trying to do is we're trying to use our expenditure restraint tools and keep the levy down as much as we can. So that's that one. I think on the next slide, sometimes it's really important. The state budget impacts our budgets more than I think a lot of people know. And there's been a lot of changes. I know we just had the discussion with our legislators over the past week and a half. So some of these things play into that. Shared revenue, state budget, that just got passed, no changes. Basically, we get about $7.3 million a year from shared revenue. Definitely something, the program we need to stay in, and that is a sharing program, which we're automatically in. The levy limits, as far as the base program, nothing changed. Those are strict restrictions on what we can tax. What can our budget be, and how much can we tax? And it's only the percentage increase from net new construction. There's a small multiplier for a TID closure, of which we don't have any this year, but it's really net new construction. There were some changes, and to most cities, I just want to point out the first one, that negative levy limit adjustment. It's going to be a huge change for a lot of cities. Again, I know we're going to talk about borrowing and bonding and things a lot more when we get into the CIP, but the really good thing we have going for us here is we amortize our debt over a 10-year period. Absolutely contrary to the norm. Most cities do 20-year. And then what happens with that is, right now the communities that are doing 20-year, they have until 2025. So basically their general fund levy is going to take a hit every year, and they're not going to be able to use that capacity from now until 2025 unless the law changes. And before this year, before right now, for 2018, there was an exception that said you only have to take the negative adjustment if you're using carryover levy, of which I don't believe the city of West Allis ever has, but it wasn't applicable to us. Now they took that exclusion out, and every community that has pre-2005 debt is going to get hit with a negative adjustment on their levy going forward.
So we're gonna get hit with that.
We're not.
No, we're not.
We don't-
That's what I thought you
No.
were saying.
We do
at
not
first.
have any. We do not have any pre-2005 debt on our records,
Yeah.
and like I
We
said,
pay
it's
it all off in
just
10 years.
it's a really good position to be in. We do utility debt a little bit longer, up to 20 years. However, that's not part of this calculation. So, sure. And then there were a couple other adjustments to the levy limits. There was there were these excluded services, so if we increase our refuse fees right now, we would have to decrease, as a fee-based service, we would have to decrease our levy for that. Fire protection was in there, the state now said that's not in there anymore, so that's a good thing for communities that are not direct bill. And then if there was a referendum, which there isn't here, the ballot would just have to be very specific as to the purpose. So, yeah, no negative impact on us on that. Expenditure restraint program, nothing changed for the city of West Allis. There's two, what I might call special focus projects, and their two communities are getting $500 and some thousand for 5 years. Special projects, special situations, not part of the program, not based on their funding levels, which is really interesting, but again, part of the state budget. Past 2 years, expenditure restraint has been very restrictive. Last year, in 2017, we were only allowed to increase our expenditure $760,000. Now, I say only because I think we have to keep it in context. Our expenditure budget is $60 million. So $760,000 was about 1%. Well, when you have collective bargaining agreements that are 2+%, you have benefits, health insurance, et cetera, that are going up more than that, there's no way you can continue to provide the same services with that much less money. We are expecting 2018 the number to go up. We won't have this September. It's all hinging on September CPI numbers, which aren't released by the federal government and the Bureau of Labor Statistics until the 15th. So by the 15th of this month, we're going to know where that is. But the numbers from August are where I got the $1.2 million calculation in. But we do get, for remaining under that levy, or those restrictions, we do get $1.5 million a year. So really, for us, I think the message is we can't afford not to be in the program. We have to stay qualified. We got some really good news late last week on transportation aids. We all heard that in the state budget, transportation aids were going up. Nobody ever knew what the impact was going to be on different cities, if they were going to pick, big projects, et cetera. We're getting an additional $235,000. Now, I will tell you that $235,000 right now is not factored into the budget. We do have some suggestions and recommendations we can talk about in a little bit, but as of right now, that's a very large increase and very favorable for us. Local Road Improvement Program, LRIP, it's a program where communities get money every other year for funding. Looks like we're going to get an extra $7,000 on about $140,000 next year. And all I can say to that is over the last 10 years, we got over $1 million. So it's a great program, but the increase is a little bit small. And then there is a grant portion, but we have not, as a city, gotten that in the past. I think this next page, maybe is going to hit home a little bit more. We talk about payment for municipal services. I know the council passed a resolution. We talked to our legislators about this. The state is currently funding the program at 38%. This program hasn't been in place since the early 1980s, at which time they were funding it at 100%. Now they're funding it at about 38%. The reason I have that first on this slide is because if you look at the personal property tax program, that's something that's changed for 2018 in the state's budget, and any machinery, tools, and machinery, tools, and patterns that are locally assessed, not the manufacturing ones by the state, but the locally assessed ones, those are not going to be personal property taxed anymore, and the state's going to replace it with an aid. They're going to replace it with the exact amount in 2018 that we received in 2017, which for today is great.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's good. Let's not say it's great, because great would be if they were going to increase it by some factor every year as the tax increases, or the tax rate is allowed to increase. So there's two problems with that. First of all, they're replacing it and telling us they're going to fund it, and the question is they're only going to fund it at today's levels, which doesn't help us as far as future needs, and we don't know if they're going to continue their commitment in the future. Then the next one, same thing with computer aid. We get about just under $200,000 in computer aid a year, and it's the same thing. For 2018 and 19, the state's going to replace that, and they're actually going to bump it up a little bit by an inflation rate, 1.5%. But when it gets to 2020, so anything after 2019, it's going to be a flat amount that was in 2019. Again, if they continue to fund it fully. So these three are now kind of in the same bucket, and I'm guessing the future changes to the personal property tax program, because in the state budget they had suggested that they maybe were going to abolish the whole personal property tax program in this year, or perhaps over a number of years. And then when it got pulled back to just one, they're just saying, you know, the message that we're getting is this year it's this, next year it might be furniture, equipment, etc. So we'll see how that goes. But these are basically taking away local control issues and putting them in the state's hands and hoping and praying that we're still going to get the money in the future. So I thought that was an interesting shift in one budget period. It's pretty much nothing changed with recycling, and they do have some improvements on the clean water fund. So I think the message is the state budget. I don't think the state budget hurt us per se this year, as maybe it did in some other years. However, we don't know what the future is going to hold, and I think we just have to keep talking to our legislators about what's important and providing services to our citizens.
The next slide is just a reiteration of the challenges that we continue to be working with. We're trying to maintain high service levels with limited ability to fund for them as costs continue to rise. We're remaining in compliance with the expenditure restraint and levy limit program that becomes more challenging. A little less challenging this year than last year, hopefully, but still challenging. Growing capital needs, and then finding a balance between pay and benefits to recruit and retain good employees while managing our personnel costs. And finally, reviewing operations and implementing change. The next item is just a snapshot of what's in the current budget. So we have $34.8 million of salary and wages, $15.6 million in benefit. That would include the OPEB benefits that we're doing as pay-as-you-go. 83.4% of the general fund budget includes salary, wages, and benefits. I believe that's down a little from last year. I think it was
About a percent higher. Yeah.
0.6, I think. On the bottom, you see our OPEB liability is $141 million. A few months ago, we discussed the report regarding that. It went from 158 to 141 due to some changes, accounting changes, as well as our change in our healthcare provider. So in the really small print, it tells us that there's 480 active employees and 516 retirees on the health plan as of the last OPEB report. And then 272 of those retirees are City of West Allis residents. The next slide contains information regarding the current or proposed personnel for 2018. There's 747.55 positions. 170 of those are non-benefited. We do have 577 benefited positions. We're down 3.75 positions from 2017. Majority of those are from the assessor's office, but there's also two small changes from one department to another, and reductions and additions. So 521 of those positions are funded by the general fund, and then 55.65 are funded by other funding sources. I think it's important to remember that while these people that are funded by other funding sources, we're not paying for them currently. When they do retire, we will be paying for their benefits on the general fund. They don't continue to be funded.
Grant runs out.
Right. So sometimes there's, when people might be thinking on a short level, that's on this fund. Well, long term, we have to look long term. So the next slide shows historical staffing of the benefited position. Been going up and down, mostly down since 2000. So I'm not gonna, unless there's any questions, I'm not gonna go through each of the years. The next slide talks about the personnel allocation by function, so more than 51% of the personnel that we have are allocated to the public safety, 27% to engineering and public works, and then 11% for both general government, and then 11% for the health, culture, and recreation. Hand it back to Peggy.
Okay, this is really just a snapshot of a page in the budget. What it does is just maybe lays out our general fund for us. You know, we focus so much on our general fund expenditures because of all of the limitations and restrictions placed on it. But in the budget, there is a lot more information on some of our other funds. Sometimes I like just to remind you, general fund is important just because of the restrictions. However, all of our special funds, really those are a lot of times funding and planning changes that are done because of these limitations. So general fund, super important, but just to keep in mind that all the other funds are important as well. And we've been working really hard to get more funds. All of our funds that we use on a regular basis will be in the 2018 budget. We had some that we were showing in summary only and different things like that. So now they're all included in the 2018 budget. But I think the bottom line is we were at 59.1 million for 2017 budget. The adjusted budget, I guess I wanted to mention it in that it's really not a real number. It's the way we've showed it to you in the past, but what that is at the end of 2016, anything we carried over or there were open encumbrances on, we did what was called a budget adjustment. We're gonna have to change the way we do that right now because the way the state is doing the expenditure restraint program, we would actually be penalized for that because when we have to report expenditure restraint numbers, we have to change it a little bit. So what you're gonna see in 2018 is you won't see an adjusted budget like this. You will see fund balance reservations. It's an accounting entry that we do to make sure those funds are still available in the new year. However, you won't see them in another budget. So right now they were in the 2016 and 17 budgets. Now they'll just remain in the 17 budget, but some of the spending will happen in 18, and we'll certainly point that out for you at year end and as we go through the processes. It's just going to look a little bit different. But we're going from that 59.1 million in 2017 to a recommended 60,362,000. Right now, that's our best estimate as far as expenditure restraint availability. We were probably a little bit conservative on that. That 1.1 million, I think I just told you, our estimate is 1.2 million. It could be as high as a little over 1.3 when we get the numbers. So I just want you to keep in mind between now and the next time we discuss this, there may be some recommended changes, not necessarily to spend some more money or up the taxes, but definitely to just use those yield restriction opportunities that we have so that we don't lose out in future years due to that. So I think that's about this one. The other thing I want to mention about the way we're doing budgeting right now for payroll, which is 84% of our budget, is a little different. We were doing a lot of what you might call group budgeting, where we'd say take our whole health costs and divide it by the number of employees we had, and that's how much we charge each department. We're now using the HTE, our accounting systems budget module, and what that does is it highlights a little bit of maybe some blending that we were doing, and then potentially, like you're gonna see, it looks down the second section from the bottom where it says health, culture, and recreation. It says that the health department's budget is going up 10.8%. It's not. It's going up like 0.7%. There was actually a carryover mistake in the 2017 budget that was about $216,000. So looks to be like they're having a big increase. They're not. It's just a budgeting correction. And you will see a lot of those corrections both ways as far as health and dental go. We're going to try not to use those offsets any longer, and we're just going to try to budget real numbers. Along with that, we have in the fringe benefit category, the unclassified category, we do have a small amount of money reserved so that if somebody goes from a single plan to a family plan during the year, we can definitely absorb that change, but we don't have to account for it in every single budget. So that's really all I have there. So this is the overview where you're used to seeing the tax rate, conspicuously missing. I have a hard time predicting what's gonna happen just because I don't know. We talked a little bit about the assessed value. We do expect the expenditure restraint increase, allowable increase to be between 2 and 2.3%. We're at 2.01 right now. Again, we can certainly make adjustments to that in the future. Tax levy, we have down at 1.96. And I think the impact, you know, the bottom line is we're about 3.7 in assessed value. That means for every 37,000, it costs 1 penny of tax rate. So if you wanted a tax rate right now tonight, I would say last year it was 1105 with the $800,000 increase in our tax levy that we're proposing. We'd be looking at in the neighborhood of about $11.27. That's based on last year's rates.
What was the number?
11.27. So basically, that extra 22 cents is what's going to get us that 800,000, and it just depends. If the levy goes down by every 1,000 it goes down, we lose a portion of our rate, and then the rate would have to go higher. But right now, again, with that estimate, we're looking at approximately on a $150,000 home, $32 to $35 for 2018, just to put it in perspective. And then that bottom section there where it talks about projected unassigned fund balance, I guess I just would ask you to keep in mind that, yes, it says it's gonna go up by $2 million, however, that's without any carryovers, and we probably know that's not gonna be the case, so that's a very, very liberal number. As far as the utility budgets go, we do have all of the revenues and expenditures expected in the budget, built in. The big wild card right now, and I think we're gonna get into it a little bit more when we talk about the capital budget, is as we do more streets, we also need to do more underground infrastructure, and that increases those items. As far as our utilities go, water utility, we have a rate that just went into effect this past week on October 1st. It was about an 8% increase. That one will not increase in 2018 except for a purchased water adjustment clause adjustment from the city of Milwaukee, which I've heard is impending. Stormwater, to the best of my knowledge, we've only borrowed for stormwater once. However, when you look at the 5-year plan and what the stormwater changes are and infrastructure needs are, we're going to have a different model as far as, it could be pay as you go, but then we could be looking at fairly substantial rate increases. So that's just something I think over the next 30 days, depending on how we look at the CIP and the direction we get on the CIP, we'd like to come back at the end of the month and make some recommendation on rates. So that would be stormwater. Sanitary sewer, hit and miss depending on how things are going and what's going on capital project wise. Sometimes we borrow, sometimes we don't. We were trying to figure out the best piece of information we could provide, and I guess because single family homes are a lot of our city, that's what this graph shows you, this chart shows you, is from 2011 to 2017 what's happened to rates. So basically a single family homeowner that uses the average amount of services went up about 13% over that time. It's not, as far as rising costs and the time we've been in, it's really not terrible. No increases are good. Yeah, it's about, and if you look at it, they've never gone up more than 4%. In some years we don't have any. In some years, the adjustments in the solid waste fund might offset some of the other increases. But I think that's a good message for us. I think keeping the overall increases, because these are the other fees people pay besides taxes, the other main ones that all of our taxpayers pay. For the most part, utility payers and ratepayers. Our utility ratepayers and taxpayers are the same thing with very few exceptions. So I think, talking about the tax rate impacts as well as the utility fee impacts are really needing to go hand in hand.
The next slide is just a summary of some of the items we've gone over. So the first talks about the non-tax levy general revenue fund increase by 1.2% or almost $300,000. The second is a goal to reduce reliance on the general fund reserves included in the 2018 revenue budget. As Peggy indicated before, this is one of the areas where possibly the general transportation aid could assist in doing this. The increase of that amount was, could be put towards this. Again, the staffing levels were reduced by 3.75 positions. The total net levy increase is just 1.96%, lower than last year at 2.64%. Right now, we are still waiting on the expenditure restraint, but the approximation might be 1.2 million. And then the assessed value, we're still waiting on that information. So the next slide is, we talk about the next step. So after we wrap up this presentation, we'd like to talk a little bit more about the capital improvement program and kind of get that together by the end of October, get the additional information we need from the state, calculate the proposed tax rate and the proposed utility rates, and provide any information that you might need regarding the proposed recommended budget. And then we'd like to have a follow-up meeting on October 30th to solidify the CIP and discuss any changes there might need to be in the budget at that time. The public hearing is set for November 7th, and then the council consideration of the budget is for November 21st.
Rebecca, that October 30th Administration and Finance meeting would be at 6 o'clock, the usual time?
Yes, if that would work.
Sure.
So, are there any questions at this time?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Alderman.
I have a lot, but I'd like to work with the departments first
Sure.
on
Okay.
them, and then, so I can narrow them down to the important ones for discussion here. I do have one idea for next year. Can we get these put into 3-ring binders? Then if we have replacement pages for the capital improvements plan, other things like that, we can just replace pages instead of getting revised copies. It might be a little easier for us in the future. But otherwise, thank you. It's probably the most comprehensive budget I've seen.
Yeah, thank you. Right.
One question, Mr. Chair.
Alderman Weigel.
Peggy, on the general transportation aids where you said we're looking at a plus 235,000, is that gonna be a one-time thing, or is that just gonna set a new base for us and it's gonna continue going on that way next year?
The only thing we know for sure is that in this biennial budget, so for
Okay,
the next
it's
2
just for 2
years,
years.
but
Okay.
but I think the idea or at the discussion at the legislature's level was to make it the new normal.
Okay.
So hopefully it's not a
That
blip.
that is good.
Yep.
Any other questions or discussion? All right, thanks everybody. Yeah, that's good. I think we're ready to go into closed session to discuss item 4, the appointment of Mr. Anthony Workachewski.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
did you want to have a little overview on
On
the
the
capital
capital
improvement
improvement
plan before
Yes.
we do that?
Yeah,
Thank you for directing me that way. Yes, absolutely.
she administered you in that
Yeah. Yep.
And Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
before we get into this, is this the same as what was in the budget?
That is the same as what was in the
Yes.
budget,
Okay,
and
no
it just had
replacement
really
pages.
some slight increases from, slight changes in totals and things from the original document that you got.
Okay.
The only problem with the document in the budget is because of the orientation we selected, it's just really hard to read. So you might wanna focus on a separate document at this point.
We just wanted to provide it in case you didn't bring your copy of this out tonight, so, let's see here. So as you're aware, as we've talked before, we're expanding the capital improvement program to include more of the capital needs of the city, there's no PowerPoint for this.
Thank you. A bobblehead here.
The committee met 5 times over the past 6 months to review the department requests and put together a prioritization or recommendation for the Administration and Finance Committee, and that's what we have here in this packet. We're also working on putting the long-term plan, going out 5 years. So we would have 2019 to 22. So at this time, we just want to highlight different areas with you, and not all the funding sources have been identified. So we need input from you or some guidance as we put things together for a presentation on the 30th, and as we finalize the budget numbers. So I don't know if you have anything to add, Peggy.
So yeah, I think it's really important to note that the Capital Improvement Committee wasn't an easy committee to be on this year. There were a lot of requests that went through. There was a lot of discussions. They listened to requests from all the departments and really had what I think was some really valid and in-depth discussions on different projects and things like that. So there's some citizen members on, as well as some aldermen, and I know some other older people came, even though they weren't on the committee. So I think just the level of detail in all of the projects. Overall, there were well over 50 requests as far as what was going to be in the budget, in the capital plan, and what wasn't. In the end, we ended up separating it, as you can see in the plan, by how we were going to fund it. We may have been a little bit backwards on that. Sometimes it's nice to talk about the priority of the projects without talking about funding. However, in the world we live in and where we were at, this was a way for us to get at different things. So that's really how in the end, after all of the reviewing of the projects and doing the research and having the discussions, that's really how we went through it as a committee. And I think in the end, for the first time for a comprehensive plan, it went pretty well. So the way that the plan itself is broken out is capital improvement plans usually go with borrowing purposes under federal laws. So basically we have what is all of our public infrastructure, streets, underground, etc. Then we talk about park improvements, utility improvements, equipment, and property improvements. So I think, maybe the first one, and probably what I think is, a pretty valid discussion that we need to have, is we've really increased our streets program in the last couple of years. I know there's been a lot of talk for a long time, and the streetscaping plays in a lot. However, we have a resolution, a charter ordinance through the city that says we can only borrow $2.75 million for streets in any given year. You might call, if you're on page 2, under the second section that says $1,039,000 for streetscaping for National Ave. In a normal capital improvement plan, I would just put that under streets. It's a little bit different than streets. It's really not your infrastructure per se. It's more of the amenities that go with the streets. So that one is separate. However, call it what you want. There has to be a conscious decision if we're going to do this to increase, borrowing levels. Whether we call it streets and increase the charter ordinance, that's really semantics, but I think everybody just really needs to be on the same page as far as what really are each of these categories.
One of the other changes you'll note in that same area is movement of the special assessment clerk salary from this to the actual operating budget.
Yeah, and the reason is really simple. We were borrowing money to pay for staff. It didn't make sense.
No.
So that was one of them.
So we had that discussion? Yeah.
Alderman Weigel, go ahead.
I'm just gonna say, in general terms, I'm not a fan of increasing borrowing, but are we still at historic low interest rates?
We are.
Yeah, and, can they go lower? They're not gonna go to negative numbers?
The way the economy's going right now, they shouldn't go lower.
Yeah.
We keep thinking things are going on the up, and then we have some kind of a correction,
Yeah.
which is what happened over the summer, and the rates slowed down again. But keep saying it can't go lower,
Well,
and it keeps
I'm just
going
thinking as a
lower.
small business owner, if I wish I needed to do something big, because, especially when you talk about these infrastructure issues, because these are things the city's gonna benefit from 20, 30, 40 years, right? You look at the improved streets, the streetscaping, those kinds of things. I know in one sense it would be really like to get stay on pay as you go, or get to pay as you go wherever we can. But these big ticket things that the people who live here in 30 years will benefit from. You're right. We shouldn't be borrowing to make payroll. I mean, that was, I'm sure, I hope there's not a lot, is there any of that? That was the only case? Yeah. And I'm sure that was just a technicality for some reason at one time it was set up like that. But borrowing for a big, long-term item, especially at historically low interest rates, I mean, if it ever makes sense, now is the time to do it. That would be the way I look at it.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman May.
So we've got kind of two topics we're talking about should we raise the borrowing limit in our charter ordinances, and the other one saying we don't. Do we increase bonding at 1.1 million for streetscaping on a 6-block stretch of National Avenue? And I understand the purpose of streetscaping. I get the idea that it's supposed to generate more, but I've got a concern that we came up with a plan of what we want for streetscaping on National Avenue without completely understanding the cost of it. Does this still include green bike lanes? Do they have to be green? Could they just be striped regularly? Are there some areas where benches and things can be donated by local businesses nearby? I mean, I'm just going to call it 1.0 million. It's a little more. For streetscaping, a 6-block stretch seems like an awful lot. And I just wonder if it would warrant a discussion again of what is included in that amount in terms of streetscaping. Would we want to scale any of that back?
Mr. Chair?
Sure.
I don't have that plan in front of me, but I guess I'm trying to remember exactly what was called streetscaping. I mean, were the bump outs considered streetscaping?
Probably.
Okay, well, I think we want the bump outs for sure. You're right. I mean, is that something that should come to this committee and we should go through it line by line? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm just wondering if we could get maybe engineering could give us another presentation on what this all includes. I mean, decorative light poles. Well, I'm fine with decorative light poles. Does it have to be to that degree of decorative light?
I'd rather
pole?
on the light poles. I'd rather stay consistent, so we don't have to inventory 6 different light poles eventually.
Right.
Yeah, for simplicity's sake. Unless it's just an on-demand item that's stocked locally.
Right.
And
And
then
then,
is that a discussion for us here and now?
well, I don't know if we need to have it for the budget, but I think we need to have it before we'd authorize any bonding or moving forward with that project. And I think it's already planned for 2018, right?
Well,
Yeah,
it's planned
it
for
is.
2018, and my understanding is we're pretty far along in
Yeah.
that plan.
Mhm.
So if there's going to be a discussion, there's potentially going to be some changes. The sooner the better. And I know I have a list. I could definitely share with you what is called streetscaping and what's not, because I talked to Pete Daniels about it. But I definitely think it's something that really should be addressed really soon if we're going to make changes, because in the discussion I had with Pete, I've already found out that if we said no, we don't want to do this, the whole $1,039,000 will not go away, because some of the costs we're in on, we've already committed to.
Mm-hmm.
So without committing, we have committed to it. So the return wouldn't be a dollar for dollar return. But my guess is there's probably still some things that can be done
Mm-hmm.
should those choices be made.
And my other concern is last Tuesday we're talking about a roof at DPW that's going to cost $1 million. That, or they're patching it. A cost of how much every year? 100,000 every year.
100,000 a year.
And it's not getting any better.
Yeah.
$1 million could buy a new roof. But I understand that that's kind of what we're hired to do, right? Kind of judge the priorities. And I'd just like to see what that all includes, maybe in greater detail. Are there places where we can cut that back a bit? I'm not in general a fan of borrowing for things that are recurring. Like you're saying, this is not a recurring cost, so I'd have less of an issue with doing this outside of the charter ordinance. Sort of like we do with the fire trucks, right? It's not every year we're gonna go for $2 billion in fire trucks. So to the two questions, I'd rather it be separate from the charter ordinance, and then I'd like to go through more detail what that includes and what that looks like again. I know that's normally a public works function. Public Works
Certainly a
Committee
financial function as well.
but it's becoming a financial function most certainly. So,
Did you wanna have that item included on the October 30th meeting, or did you
Or
wanna
even before
hold,
then.
I was even
or next
I
Tuesday?
think we need to do it, judging by what Peggy is saying, we need, October 30th is too late, right?
I would say the sooner the better.
Is there a way we could do it next Tuesday? Or maybe even not during the normal? Is there a way to meet earlier?
Ahead of time.
I can do that.
Is there anything
Mr.
else
Chair,
planned for 6?
you do have the capital improvement program item open. If you certainly could have this item scheduled again
Get there.
next Tuesday at 6 p.m. or something like that if you wanted to discuss it. I don't know that there would be enough time at the recess meeting, but if you wanted to.
Sure.
It's up to the chair. I think it's a good idea to.
And
Sure,
there may be other
okay.
stuff too we wanna put in there anyways.
Yeah, we can meet at 6 p.m. on Tuesday prior to our council meeting.
I think that would work. Of course, before I propose it, I should just make sure it works for
Yeah.
me too. All right. Yeah, that should work. And, Mr. Chair, when
Sure, go ahead.
Pete comes in to describe this for us, maybe he can describe what pieces and the amounts that are irreversible, if you will, because they've already been committed.
Okay.
Although I was always taught that it's not final till it's in the ground.
Except for when you're working with the state.
Yes. Yeah, and it probably messes with our cost share.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion or concerns?
Items, pages 4, 5, and 6 will you see the other items that are not included in the street or streetscaping. You can see some of the items have already been included in the operating budget, more on page 5 than on page 4. Some, there's been a recommendation to deal with them with the reserves or capital accumulation funds or bonding, and then there's others that have no funding source identified. So, we're just looking for some input on, mostly probably the items that have no funding source identified, or is there something just in the plan in general that we should not be trying to include or fund? We can go through the items line by line, or you could just pick out the ones that you might be interested in discussing.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I'd be curious, the bike and pedestrian infrastructure is listed under other bonding. Is that the money the state's pulling away on the? No.
Bridge over 100? No.
What's that one
This,
for?
this, I
We
should,
would
I should
actually-
say it's not the state pulling money away, it was a planned improvements. So it's on page 9, I'm just trying to see how much detail is there. It says citywide sidewalks and trails. Basically, they're proposing $25,000 a year. I'm not getting a lot of detail, but we can certainly bring, this is definitely a local project, not, I know you did hear about the one where the state's pulling back on that
Mhm.
design, but this is, something different. Oh, there's some more information on the back. So it's based on the Bike and Ped master plan. bike lane, route marking, signs, and pedestrian infrastructure.
I have nothing against bikes and peds, but I would think that that's automatically a function of the street design that should be included within the street's function.
Usually when they're included as part of a street project, they would get folded into that.
Mhm.
My understanding is these are ones that are not part of established street
These
projects.
could be like those, the two connections to the Hank Aaron that were never completed. There's one off of Schlinger. and
That
then
one
one's
DOT's gonna do for us. I talked to him to that one.
Just recently?
About a year and a half ago. One off 94.
No, it's not there anymore. Have you talked to
See what I did?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
They're supposed to be doing that when they repave the rest of the Hast. That one.
yeah. 72nd Street also.
What's the one on 72nd? The Hast.
There's one at 72nd, there's a house connection at 72nd Street that's actually in the city of Milwaukee, but it services West Dallas residents.
I know which one you're talking about.
So,
Okay.
and I guess, I'm assuming that these are the kinds of things that this is talking about.
We can
I don't
certainly
think we want
talk
to borrow
about that
extra for that, you know?
also next, more in detail next week. if
Yeah.
you-
All right.
What's the street lighting upgrades and street light conversion?
That's going to LED lighting?
Mhm. So the alley lights would be, yeah, is that?
Even
the-
though
on
alley
page
alley is
4?
misspelled, but that's
Yeah,
okay.
the ally
Alley,
lights.
alley lights, yes. I believe the ROI on that was 5 or
I think
7.
the alley one was pretty short. I think it was because the alley
Yeah.
one, didn't include a lot of underground conduit changes that they had to make, but
A
the
lot of it's
additional
overhead, yeah.
streetlight upgrades, the 200,000, that was a drop in the bucket as far as the need goes. That amount,
Mhm.
was a very conservative, small start to those improvements.
So this is like a long-term, again, I would think lighting belongs in the streets function. Right-of-way line to right-of-way line, that's your street.
And there is, whenever there's a street project, there is, street lighting is included with that, but these would be in locations that there's not a street program going on in 2018.
And it would be LED, is that the idea, or is it to put them into parallel, from series to parallel?
No, I think it's the,
circuits,
I think
or-
it's the LED conversion. When it says
Right.
conversion, yeah.
Yeah, and the alleys are already in parallel, so
Mhm.
that's an easier fix.
Oh, are they?
Yeah,
Oh, nice.
that's my understanding.
So this will essentially pay for itself within the 5 years, 5 or 7, I can't find the project information.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I did have a question about the police audio recording system. Do we currently not have an audio recording system? I see the chief is here. Or did I understand it's, we're gonna do the same system that everybody else is using?
We
That's
do
what it
have
is,
one,
yeah.
but it's at end of life
Yeah.
and won't be supported. And it's critical, it's one of the
Oh, yeah.
things, it backs up all the calls.
I thought I thought it was strange that.
Yep, no, we definitely do have one. Thank God we have one.
Maybe we need a street lighting utility or fund, huh?
Some cities
that
have
ever-
it.
Some do that.
Well, I was, I'm serious,
Careful.
what does
You're
that
creating
take?
more government.
No, let's not do that.
Fee versus a tax.
Is that allowed
It's allowed.
Yeah.
It's
legally?
not one of the restricted services.
Milwaukee does it. Right? Does Milwaukee do it?
I don't think they have a commission or an authority.
Everything's on the water bill, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's the utility.
That's how they get you.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, very seriously, I mean, if this is something that's gonna last, I mean, how many, you said this 200,000 is a drop in the bucket, what's our long-term cost on that?
Oh, it was
Millions.
millions, and it was like 79-year.
Yeah, the payback
ROI.
wasn't real great on it either.
We're
Because
gonna
this
borrow
is-
on that.
This is one of the items that we had extensive discussions on because having difficulty finding the parts any longer
Yes.
for replacements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's, at some point, I think we're buying them from, I'm not sure what we call them now, Eastern Bloc
Yeah.
nations or,
Yeah. Well, so I'm sorry.
The
So
Warsaw Pact.
let's think about this. So we bond for this. We're going to end up paying that amount plus interest because it's going to be a recurring thing every year for the next 79 years.
yes.
That should be a fee-based thing. That should not be a bonding-based thing.
So that's what we really need to talk about as far as, the way our budget is structured. We usually do have monies left at the end of the year, and we have this carryover process. You approve the carryovers. Sometimes those carryovers are in the neighborhood of $2 million. And I'm not here to tell you that we're gonna have $2 million every single year, but we might wanna start, how we're trying to prioritize capital improvement projects, we might wanna start prioritizing department requests for carryover. And I get it, there's a lot of things that wouldn't get done here if not for carryover, because we just don't have the capacity in our budget. However, I think it might be time, and I think I heard one of you say it the other night, and I can't remember. I said I didn't have a conversation with you, but it was a thought that those carryovers really have to start being city priorities as opposed to department priorities, because these are the kind of things where we have some real strong needs. There's also, been a lot of discussion on this whole idea of how many electricians the city carries as far as staff. Well, 2 electricians would give you not enough for this, but 3 would, so, I mean, there's just some tough decisions and discussions that have to be had on what it is that we wanna do, where we wanna focus our resources, and then with some of these carryover funds that we have, would those be good uses for them? So, I put those in bonding category, not because that's what we're recommending, but because they would fit in a bonding category. A roof repair, I guess you could bond for, but a roof repair isn't a long-term capital improvement.
A new roof would.
A new roof would be absolutely, but
Right.
this is a repair.
But that was what the million would be a whole new roof.
Right. So there's things that fit under borrowing and there's things that don't. These would fit, but again, I'm not sure if we can figure out a way to get it as a part of our regular budget. It would be better than borrowing, because like you said, when we borrow we get less bang for our buck. No matter how low the interest costs are, we're still paying interest costs, carrying costs. So it's definitely something as we go through this process, this year-end process, that we really want to focus on.
And if we're talking, it's probably less than 79 years. The rate of the return on investment was 79. It would probably be closer to 50 years to get a full.
For the replacement?
Yeah.
Because they're doing them with the road, the
We're
construction.
doing some with construction, and then these would be additional
Yeah.
to that. I would say north of 20 years.
Mm-hmm. I hate borrowing when it's a long-term, year-after-year thing. It just doesn't make sense.
So when we get ahead of, if we do a street, if we redo the lights on a street without the construction, and then 10 years later we do the construction, we don't redo the lights, and the lights only would get redone. And this is the conversion
If they
to
would.
series. This is the series conversion.
To parallel from series.
Yeah, from
to-
series. Yeah. I think it's the same net thing though.
Except you're paying more. By
Yeah.
renting it.
Yeah, I understand it's not
So,
part of a
yeah,
bigger project.
That's
it's-
the hardest part, is
Yeah.
because the state doesn't allow for those kind of things to happen in your operating budget. They not only allow, but they encourage borrowing,
They want us to
because
borrow.
any post-2005 borrowing, we can add, if you wanna borrow 10 million next year, we can borrow 10 million. That's the way it's crazy, that's the way the, state rules are set up. The borrowing, any borrowing on levy limits, or capital spending outside of expenditure restraint gets added on and taken off every year and does not count against cities at all. Seems kinda backwards, but that's,
But if we set street lighting as a utility,
It's completely outside.
it would be completely outside.
and you'd put the electrical charges from We Energies in that,
Which is surprisingly
Fund.
low.
really?
Yes. I asked, I was wondering what our
Electric bill?
our nightly electric bill is for streetlights. It was
Yeah.
pretty low.
Oh, electricity costs less at night,
Yes,
too.
because they gotta run the generators anyway.
That's right.
Yeah.
They give us a good price at night.
Right.
And we rent the poles from them on our alley lights. That's
Oh, those are rented.
Not too bad. That's how that goes. We rent the space on their poles in the alleys.
Oh, that makes sense. That's right.
Yeah. So to borrow or not to borrow?
I'd rather do a separate utility, but, and do fee-based, based on actual cost.
I
but-
don't think the citizens, I don't think there's an appetite for, with the citizens to have another fee added to their utility
Yeah.
bill.
They're gonna pay for more.
I understand that,
Through bonding, they actually pay more.
yeah.
But through taxes, they have deduction.
Yeah.
This is an
Right,
age-old
deduction,
discussion.
yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
there's both
But most
sides
people
of
don't take
that.
the
They're just gonna
deduction.
see it as a new tax.
Yeah, they're just gonna see it as a
Fee.
new fee.
But that also eats up expenditure restraint capacity later, doesn't it? Doesn't it eat up some of our capacity?
Technically, under the letter of the law, yes. Have there been instances where I've seen special revenue funds created for this and had them done outside of general fund spending? Yes.
We need to have a separate conversation on that one. Yikes. I mean, let's just say worst comes to worst, we don't do the alley light conversions and we don't do any street light upgrades in this next year. Is the city still gonna function? Are we gonna be okay? If this is a discussion we can carry forward?
I didn't get the impression that it's a today problem, but it's a very large tomorrow problem.
Well, so
And if
Kevin-
we don't start doing
If we don't
it,
start, right,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Just like our
elephants.
OPEB, you know, you wanna just push, either
That's
push
a
the
big
costs
one.
off to the future or the work and the costs off. to the
right.
future.
And of all of the items in our capital improvement budget, that's an item that pays for itself, and the return on investment is 5 to 6 years. So that's something we want to do.
but could possibly
Is
be
there a,
done through
is there,
carryover.
is there a
So
way to get a cost benefit of some of this, of the two ideas?
I believe they actually did cost benefits
Yeah.
on both of them, so we can
Yeah.
But I mean,
definitely
on
bring
both ideas
information.
of the fee versus the,
Oh, yeah, and we can do some research on
Are
the
you
fees.
stuck on your utility?
I'm not stuck on the utility, I just wanna find a way that's best for the taxpayer and the ratepayer.
Yeah.
Because most cases they're one and the same, but,
Well, as Peggy indicated too, with the carryovers, if there's more prioritization of the requests, we could utilize some of that for these fundings too, because we're
Right.
not borrowing on January 1st, right? So we have
Yeah.
some time
No.
to make those decisions.
and my idea with it is not, well, set up a utility, wouldn't it be great? I'm just saying we should keep it as an option. Let's see what the bottom line works out to for, the ratepayer and the taxpayer, and sometimes one and the same. And maybe we'll get a better answer, a clearer answer of which is best.
Well, the utility would go to nonprofits.
It's a larger
Mhm.
pool.
Yeah, it's a larger pool.
Let me do a little bit of research. I mean, I can bring something back. I think I'm just going through it in my head right now. You know, we're going to have to talk about what are the expenditures, how fast do they need to happen, what kind of money would we need to collect from each citizen in order to make it work without the borrowing? Because a lot of times in utilities, you're right back to the borrowing point anyway.
Which we don't
So,
wanna do. So
I
if we're
think
going
if
back
we
to
just look
borrowing,
at
we're
some
not
of
gonna do
this-
it.
Yeah,
Yep.
just keep it simple.
Yep.
So there's a lot of other stuff in here. Municipal yard building, that's, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't ask.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Go ahead.
that's $100,000, but that's just fixing a piece. The HVAC retrofit at the library,
I'm told that's a very high priority
Mhm.
project.
okay. So how do we do that with no funding source identified? Do we wait for the carryovers? I mean, a couple years ago, when we had carryovers, we intentionally said everything goes to capital. Is that something we could wait? Man, I don't wanna wait and see if
It
it's gonna
is
be a
something we
problem,
could
but-
wait. I mean,
Mhm.
you can't fix 20 or more years of problems in 1 year,
Right.
so keep that in
Yeah,
mind.
no, it's- yeah.
But yeah, I think it
I
would be
think-
very
I-
viable to wait.
I think a goal would be to have no carryovers next year.
We might be a few years from
Well,
Well, and it's
Yeah,
that
but
catch
long
22,
term.
yeah,
Or near
yeah,
term.
it's a tough one. I mean, do we wanna get tighter on this? Yes, we wanna get tighter on
Okay.
budgeting and
Yeah.
the way we're doing things, but when we get tighter, we have to understand that when emergencies come up,
Yep.
we can't fund them as easily as I mean, really, those kind of decisions have been not tough decisions to make because we've had the extra funding and the vacancies and things. You know, we staff, our budget is a full staff model. do you know any department that's full staff at all times? I mean, I know there's,
Well, I'm
you
reading,
know,
according to the budget, a lot of them are.
well, according
Yeah.
to the budget, because
DPW's
that's,
100%.
because
Yeah.
that's how we budget. We budget
Yeah.
for full staffing. There's a lot of different things you can do to acknowledge that you don't have full staffing all year. The problem is when you go
Which
too
ones?
far, you start with structural deficits, right? I can't just start cutting everybody's budget, but if we can get some good history in place and find out what we really need, yeah, we have tighter budgets, and that's a good thing. However, we don't have extra money for this, so it's kind of that lower those and increase these at the same time, using them in the operating budget so we don't have to do the borrowing. So it really is kind of a balancing act, that'll take a couple of years for us to accomplish. But yeah, you're right, the best thing would be is if we could fit in all of our needs. Yeah, the needs might change from year to year, but we can fit them into the budget. We don't have to worry about the borrowing and the interest payback, and then the budgets are tighter. And we have decent reserves as far as other kinds of emergencies. The problem with fund balance reserves is, as much as we call them a savings account, it's kind of a super savings account because you get penalized when you take it out of reserves. Whether we plan for it or not. Last year we spent $2 million on capital items that were all planned for, and Moody said, yeah, we don't really like that. We understand your fund balance is big, but we don't really like it when you reduce it. Okay, thank you
We
very
get
much.
it.
But yeah, but so that's why the carryover process is good, because it never technically goes to
We
fund
don't have to
balance
reach into
reserve.
that.
It stays above board before putting it in, so, yeah, definitely something we can get better at.
So, Mr. Chair, I have another question. When we say reserves capital accumulation funds, we're not saying projected capital accumulation from last year. This is capital accumulation left from this year.
That already exists, correct?
Okay. And it's in the budget, but it relates to this as well. I noticed some departments continue to put money aside for capital accumulation. Fire department continues to put around $250,000. Weren't we trying to get away from that? Weren't we trying to keep it all in a pool?
So that's the other part of, with expenditure restraint, when you lose those placeholders, again, it's that balance. What are we gonna take out and what are we gonna put back in? Yes, in fact, we've had discussions with the police department. You know, they've had this asset forfeiture fund. They may not have that. That's on the upside of over $150,000 a year. So there are many more departments that are going to start needing those reserves. And so the idea is, yes, if we could make them less departmental and more city reserves and start using them for some of the priorities, that would be a good idea.
Well,
But
this is
we
an
didn't wanna
example. We're
pull them
budgeting
out.
a $250,000 for the fire department for capital accumulation. Well, that would pay for our alley lighting or our
I think that was for the payment of the borrowing.
If you're, I was gonna say, are you talking
There's
about,
two
there's two
separate-
separate ones. If
There's
you're
two
talking about the
separate ones.
177-ish, that is actually the savings that they had to go towards that, but we just decided to use that for the debt payment on it, because we did do the borrowing. So that was in there for that reason. But again, over time, some of those could switch over. So yes, I know what you're referring to, and
Well, and then again, it relates to the budget, but also relates to this. DPW listed no vacant positions. How many positions are vacant in DPW right
No,
now?
they listed them.
I didn't see any vacant
I-
ones. I saw every position listed except vacant.
yeah, they
There's
have
about
them
more than
listed.
20, I believe.
Unless I missed it. There's several pages here.
I think those
Since
are.
everyone else is opening up.
Oh, here it is. No, you're right.
Yeah.
Length
whole
of
bunch
there they
listed.
are. So look at all those positions.
Yeah.
We're
Back
still
to 2011.
back to 2011, and we're still plugging in a number into the budget as if it's money we're spending. We're not spending that in DPW. We're not spending that money there. So it adds to that $2 million or whatever of accumulation carryover. Why don't we, if we're not going to fill some of these, they've been vacant since 2011. Cut them and use the money towards this.
And I think that step started this year.
Mhm.
So for example, there was a position,
Administrative support
Yep.
assistant.
Two of them.
and then there were actually some positions from DPW that were transferred to IT. So I think that ball is rolling right now. But yes, you're right. As we go through, we have to start acknowledging that. Now, there's some that are gonna be, for example, in the fire department right now, I think we have 9 vacancies. So 9 vacancies is a lot. However, we've had them for all of 2017, and we're likely gonna have them at least till April of 2018, because that's when they do their recruiting thing. The hard thing of not budgeting for them is some year we might have full staffing, but likely we just kind of have to pick what we think is going to be the most likely situation and adjust our budgets for those things, you know, keep the positions, but don't necessarily keep all of the funding,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can acknowledge some of those vacancies.
I guess what I'm saying is I wonder if some of this can be backfilled by some of the,
Absolutely.
yeah.
It certainly can be from the carryover from those positions that were budgeted for.
Yeah,
in
and that's where the
2016.
carryover comes from,
Right,
for the most
right.
part, right.
So it's kind of hard to, I mean, do you want us to determine where to put the money for the
We can,
no funding sources or?
we could come up with a recommendation. I think if you would just give us some guidance, if there's something that you absolutely don't want in the plan, or,
Yeah, I would
Or
say if the
absolutely
priority, yeah, if they're
do.
all priorities, then we would just need to hear that, and we will make our best recommendation as far as funding goes.
Yeah, I think it's more the first that they are all priorities, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we trust the capital improvements plan.
Yeah.
But if you come back to us and say, well, we found everything but $250,000, well, then we're gonna have to find what to do, either raise it or.
in last year's budget, a lot of the capital plan listed carryover and things like that as funding for
Mm-hmm.
this year, so we can certainly do that.
Because how
again.
much of other bonding, other than the streetscaping, how much other bonding plus no source identified are we talking about?
So
Is
it's
there- is there a
basically
bottom
the
line?
two
Here it
street
is.
lighting programs as well as the, other fire apparatus.
The 150.
So 1 point, is it about 1 point, if I add the bottom line on page 6
1.8, yep.
and subtract off the streetscaping amount, we're talking about 1.4 million?
No, like
1.45?
less
Oh,
than that,
that's less.
Yeah.
because you're gonna take off 1 million, basically, you're gonna take off that, so you have about just shy of 750.
But then you have to add in the no funding source identified.
Oh,
Right.
and you're gonna add those, yes,
So about 1.45 million, I
Yep.
think.
Mhm.
about.
for the two, yep.
That, emergency generator at the fire station, that's the actual cost, that's not just engineering for it?
You get that a lot, don't we?
Yeah. Well, that's pretty good then, it seems.
And I believe that's
That's what
the,
it says, it doesn't say.
it's one per year, yeah, no, I
Yeah.
believe that is the cost. I believe there's already a plan in place.
All right, any further discussion? Go ahead, Alderman May.
Let's say by our next meeting, we're not gonna have the expenditure restraint number, you'll probably just get them that day, the day before,
Next week,
17th. You probably won't know enough yet.
right.
All right, I'm trying to keep her moving here.
Yeah, thank you. Mr.
So, any other discussion? All right, well, we'll continue this discussion at our next upcoming meetings, on Tuesday before our council meeting. And, we'll have more information then.
That's
One time. Let's see.
Gesundheit.
All right, now can I go on to our closed session issue? And I'm serious, can I? Hold on. Okay, thank you. All right, please take notice that the Administration and Finance Committee of the City of West Allis will meet at approximately 6 p.m. at City Hall Monday, October 9, to vote on a motion to convene in closed session at said time and place to interview Anthony Workacheski as candidate for IT Director position and deliberate the proposed appointment of Anthony Workacheski. Am I pronouncing that right, Tony? Workacheski? Yep. All right, good. For IT Director position and take such further action as may be necessary and appropriate. Peggy, when you go out, can you flip the sign to closed? And even though I know you have your hands full, I'm gonna, thank you. A closed session for the above purposes is authorized pursuant to the provisions of Wisconsin Statute Section 19.851 C, E, and
So
F.
moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Alderman Rope.
Aye.
Alderman May.
Aye.
Alderman
Aye.
The chair votes aye. We are in closed session.